Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 most important assassinations in history.
Number 10. Benazir Bhutto. While no longer a sitting head of state, Bhutto's influence on Pakistani politics was considerable. A moderate voice in a country fraught with extremism, her death at the hands of Islamic militants may have single-handedly destroyed any chance the nation might have had for political stability and likely contributed to the general downward spiral the nation has experienced ever since. While it's unknown whether she might have made a major difference in slowing or arresting Pakistan's increasingly militant tendencies, her death left a void that no opposition leader has been able to fill, leaving nuclear-capable Pakistan an increasingly unstable and dangerous nation. Number 9. Reinhard Heydrich. Reinhard Heydrich was one of the men who could have won the war for Germany had he not been killed by Czech partisans on the streets of Prague in 1942. How? Every bit as ruthless and twice as smart as his protege, Adolf Hitler, the man was being groomed to be the Führer's successor when he died. Had he lived, who knows if he might not have eventually found the kahunas to oust an increasingly frail and delusional Hitler and take the reins of the Third Reich himself, a prospect that could have had profound implications for the Allies. Certainly, under Heydrich's leadership, the many mistakes made by Hitler in the last years of the war that all but sealed Germany's fate may have been avoided. On the other hand, he may have just made different mistakes that would have hastened Germany's defeat, but that's for alternate history aficionados to work out. Number 8. Indira Gandhi, Indian Prime Minister, 1984. Like Benazir Bhutto, see number 10, for an entire generation of Indians, Indira Gandhi, no relation to number 6 coming up, was the voice of modernization whose death resulted in a period of considerable political instability in India for several years afterwards, instability that was to be behind the death of her own son, Rajiv Gandhi, at the hands of Tamil extremists in 1991. Though often considered a controversial and at times heavy-handed and unpopular figure in Indian politics, her influence and desire to bring India into the 20th century cannot be underestimated, nor can the damage done to those plans, at least in the short term, be denied. Number 7. John F. Kennedy, US President, 1963. While Kennedy was just one of 4 US presidents to die at the hands of an assassin, and one of no fewer than 10 presidents to experience an assassination attempt, none were as public or had as much impact on the American psyche as did the death of the young former senator from Massachusetts. While his death only had a minor impact on the political course he had set for the country, his successor Lyndon Johnson continued with many of his programs and policies, it can never be denied how profoundly his death cast a pall over the American people that has, in some ways, remained to this day. But even more than that, his death resulted in the creation of the entire cottage industry of conspiracy theories, all of which have done much to stoke the fires of paranoia and cynicism that burn so strongly in the United States. Number 6. Mahatma Gandhi, Indian political activist and spiritual leader, 1948. The voice of non-violence in an increasingly violent world, when the emaciated Indian holy man was gunned down on the streets of New Delhi by a university student turned activist, it was a tremendous blow to not only India but to the entire world. His policies of compassion towards the poor and non-violent resistance served as a blueprint for peaceful change, while his ability to affect both Hindu and Muslim alike made peace kind of possible in a war-torn nation. The only positive thing that can be said, if such a thing is possible, is that it was fortunate his assailant was a fellow Hindu. Had he been gunned down by a Muslim, it might have turned the subcontinent into a religious battleground. Number 5. Julius Caesar, Emperor of Rome, 44 BCE. While the sort of event that seems more a part of melodrama than real history, the murder of Rome's greatest general and first emperor at the hands of his own Senate set the Roman Empire on a course that was to set her on the path of centuries of turmoil and treachery. What Rome might have looked like had he stayed in power is unknown, of course, but it's likely the transition of power in the future would have been a far less messy affair. There also certainly wouldn't have been the resultant civil war that very nearly split the empire in two either. On the other hand, without Caesar's death to kickstart a whole sordid chain of events, we would never have the Cleopatra-Mark Antony tryst to entertain us all these centuries later, would we? Number 4. Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights activist, 1968. While it's impossible to know how things would have gone for the black community in the late 60s and early 70s had King not been silenced by an assassin, the loss of their chief spokesman was unquestionably a huge blow to the entire civil rights movement. Considered the voice of reason and moderation in a time of increasing strife, his death opened the door for more militant leaders to rise to the forefront of the movement, often resulting in the radicalization of the black community and creating deeper divisions than was already evident. Had he lived, it's possible the late 60s and early 70s would have had a far less militant air about them, though that's purely speculative. Number 3. Alexander II, Tsar of Russia, 1881. While not many people know much about Tsar Alexander II of Russia, his death at the hands of terrorists, yes, they had them back then, even though at the time they were called anarchists, in March of 1881, changed the course of Russian history for the worst. Something of an enlightened monarch and a reformer, he was on the verge of creating a parliament in Russia at the time of his death, which likely would have led to the country's eventual democratization, much as we'd seen in England and other European countries around this time. Instead, his successors decided to take a more heavy-handed approach, resulting in 30 more years of oppressive and corrupt leadership and sowing the seeds for the 1917 revolution that would introduce communism to the world, the effects of which we are still feeling today. Number 2. Abraham Lincoln, US President, 1865. No assassination has had as great an impact on a country than did that of the 16th President of the United States. His death at the hands of an actor turned Southern agitator John Wilkes Booth is not only the stuff of legend, but was disastrous to the South as well, who would have fared much better under Lincoln's hand in the aftermath of the Civil War than it did under Andrew Johnson and subsequent administrators. In fact, it could be said that because of Booth's treachery, the Civil War lasted decades longer, at least in the minds of many Southerners, than it would have otherwise, and likely contributed greatly to the oppression of blacks in the South. As such, in killing Lincoln, Booth may have damaged his beloved South far more than his actions could have ever helped it. Number 1. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir apparent to the Austro-Hungarian throne, 1914. So why does this guy make it to number 1 on the list? After all, it's hard to imagine that the assassination of a fairly obscure nobleman could have huge repercussions, much less be the most important assassination in history. However, the death of the Archduke and his wife as they rode in an open car through the streets of Sarajevo, the capital of modern-day Bosnia-Herzegovina, but at the time part of Greater Serbia, had immediate and profound repercussions. The problem was that the assassin, you guessed it, another anarchist, was part of a group that had ties to the Serbian military itself. As such, in a world-class overreaction, Austro-Hungary held the Serbian government complicit in the murder and set in motion the wheels of war, which would, in turn, start a chain of events that would, over the course of just a few weeks, not only bring the two countries to blows, but would drag the entire continent into the fray with it. The result? Well, that's World War I, arguably one of the bloodiest and most futile conflicts in history. Its final death toll was 15 million people. Certainly, far better known and more powerful people have been assassinated over the years, but none had the consequences this single act of mindless brutality and sheer stupidity entailed.
So I really hope you found that video informative. If you did, please do hit that like button below and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, over there on the right, a couple of other of our videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and thank you for watching.